Start recording. Hey everyone, Stacks here. Welcome back to the channel. Today I got with me my friend Doc, our X-Men historian for the comic aficionados. Welcome, Doc. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great tonight. Getting to talk some X-Men.
Absolutely. And I got a question actually in the comments, or somebody reached out and said, hey, I know I love X-Men, and I'm kind of a new reader. I don't quite understand everything that's going on with Cable. And I said, boy, do I know the guy for you. Because Cable is what, your second favorite character?
Yeah, he's my second favorite right behind Wolverine.
And I mean, I figure who else better to come ask than you for everything there is to know about Cable from start to what we have now with Kid Cable in his own book. So where do we even start, Doc?
You know what? We might as well just start right at the beginning with New Mutants 87, which was, the first appearance of Cable. Now, Liefeld had been, he had recently come onto the book and kind of taken over a little bit more direction of it. I mean, Louise Simonson was still on it. She was still writing it, but Rob kind of wanted to start putting his personal stamp on it. So he had a couple of ideas for, villains and other new characters. And the first one that he really introduced that was any, importance was Cable. And he brought him in to kind of be the new leader of the X-Men, or not the X-Men, the New Mutants, because the Mutants were started by Xavier. Mm-hmm. And then when Xavier kind of went off into space, he left them, under the charge of Magneto, actually. And so then Magneto starts, was kind of in charge of the New Mutants. But then Magneto kind of went rogue around, a couple of months previous, maybe a year or so previous, during Acts of Vengeance. He, kind of got involved with the Hellfire Club, and he kind of became more of a villain again. Not full-on villain, but definitely not, headmaster material. So Rob kind of felt, we need a new, they're still young. They're still, not really, they're not X-Men yet. So they need somebody to give them direction. And he thought, it would fit better. They've already had the kind of the MLK, and then they've had the Malcolm X, but they never had like the military leader.
Yeah, that guy was the soldier leader type, rather than
that soldier. And it was kind of that third way. And so it would be interesting to explore that. And he brought in, he introduced Cable, and he had a lot of ideas for what Cable was gonna be, and with like having like a mysterious connection to Wolverine, and they knew each other from the past, and all this stuff. A lot of it never really developed in the comics, but Cable himself was very, he's a mutant, but he's got that cool cybernetic arm, the glowing eye. He's got a bunch of guns, all the pouches. He was very, kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger, circa Commando.
Absolutely 1990s, just in a nutshell right there.
Yeah, like late 80s, early 90s. It had that very. I always think of the movie Commando whenever I think of.
I always think of the bazooka with the 4 rounds. On that one.
Yeah, because that was like something fluky, something crazy that Cable would carry.
Yeah.
Because he had these massive guns. They were bigger than his friggin' head half the time. And so, he came on and kind of very quickly started almost totally changing the dynamic of the New Mutants. Now, they had lost some of their members. Some of them had left. Some of them shortly after died. You had, because he was only there for maybe 6 issues before you got to Extinction Agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're, running he's running the New Mutants out of what was left of like the sub basements in where the old Xavier Mansion had been, because it was already, destroyed at the time. That's their home. And then the X-Men come back in. Then you have like the whole thing with, Extinction Agenda, but it was a very kind of military style, crossover.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of a full-on war between the island of Genosha, which was, a essentially an apartheid state. It was kind of Claremont and Louise Simonson's commentary on, apartheid South Africa, and versus, going to war with the X-Men and all of Mutantum, but, primarily represented by the X-Men.
Right.
So, having a military kind of leader as a big part of that crossover it made a lot of sense. And, Cable didn't do a lot in that particular crossover because he was still new. Rob wasn't really heavily involved in it. There was much more of a Jim Lee, centric crossover. So they didn't really give Cable a lot to do in that, but he did lose one of the New Mutants. Warlock died during that. And the New Mutants, the remaining New Mutants, some of them, kind of viewed it as a failure of Cable's leadership. That one of his soldiers got killed, and it kind of forced, Cable into a situation where he decided that it was time to really push their training, push them into, and it kind of got them on his side of him saying basically, look, if you would have listened to me earlier and worked hard at this and actually became the fighting force that I expect you to be, maybe Warlock wouldn't be dead. So maybe it's your fault. And, they lost a couple of the members at that point, like Sunspot left, Roberto DaCosta, he was a founding member of the New Mutants. They added in James Proudstar, which was the brother of John Proudstar, the original Thunderbird, and James was there as Warpath instead of Thunderbird, but he basically wore the exact same costume. Cannonball stuck around, Boom Boom stuck around, and they introduced Domino and Deadpool right around this time, and then Feral and Shatterstar and Richter, and that was basically the team. And at that point, they decided to, it was kind of a editorial decision, but they decided that it was time to rebrand New Mutants as X-Force. So, they went ahead with the relaunch, and this time it was much more of a, this was different than the X-Men. Cable kind of had an idea of, I'm going to turn this team into a straight up military, like paramilitary unit. What the X-Men have done, even what the Brotherhood had done previous, what the Hellions had done, none of it was good enough. None of it went far enough. They needed to be a full on paramilitary force.
Yeah, strike team.
Yeah. So but at the same time, Rob was leaving the book. He got about 12 issues into X-Force, and that's when he was leaving to go start Image. So a lot of people, Fabian kind of, and Rob had been writing the book too. He was writing and drawing it the same way that McFarlane got to write and draw the adjectiveless Spider-Man book.
Right.
And kind of the same way that Jim Lee had been doing all the plots for the adjectiveless X-Men book. But just bringing in somebody else to script it. Unlike, the other ones, Jim wasn't actually scripting his own book. But so when Rob left, it kind of left Cable in limbo. There was right around the same time they had done a 2-issue miniseries, and then they had started an ongoing series. And Cable was ultra popular. In my opinion, he still is probably the second most commercially viable mutant. And what I mean by that is able to hold his own series.
Yeah, absolutely. When he's done right.
Yeah. So, Cable's, they had launched the Cable ongoing series. And at the same time, they were kind of almost pulling Cable out of X-Force. Because I don't think, they really knew what to do with him in that book. And because, a lot of the time had been spent around, Cable, or Cable turning the New Mutants into X-Force and them fighting the MLF, which was the Mutant Liberation Front. And so, but the interesting thing was Cable was a time traveler. I mean, sorry, I probably should have mentioned this earlier. Cable was a time traveler. He comes from the 31st century, comes back to the 20th century. I guess now he comes to the 21st century, whatever the Marvel sliding timeline is, whatever it puts there now. And one of the reasons why is because he's from a future where Apocalypse has risen and started a war and created a world where it was survival of the fittest. And Apocalypse has actually recently been usurped, and he was, kind of beaten by a mysterious villain named Strife. And I don't know if you've ever seen Strife. He was almost as quintessentially 90s as Cable was.
I loved it with the helmet that was wider than his shoulders. And the spikes everywhere. Oh yeah, it's absolutely love it.
The spikes on the sides of the thighs and on the shoulders. The helmet with the blade things shooting out of the sides. All chrome. He looks like, I don't know, Razor Blade Man. Yeah, it's like if Bic created a superhero in the 90s as product placement. That's what Strife would have looked like. So, they have, but you don't know anything about Strife. Except for a couple issues into X-Force, you find out, Strife takes his helmet off and he looks exactly like Cable.
Right.
And you're sitting there going, wait, is Cable actually bad and playing both sides against each other? Is that Cable? And you don't know for a while. Like, they don't make it really that clear. Because I don't think at this point you've even seen Cable actually fighting Strife face to face. And since he's a time traveler, maybe it's a future version of Cable. Maybe it's a previous version of Cable. Nobody knows yet. And the thing with time travel is it can make your head hurt.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It can make your friggin' head hurt. And time travel, it makes my head hurt sometimes, but also I kind of love it. So Strife you find out shortly after is not Cable. However, but he kind of is, because he is a clone of Cable. But Strife believes that he's not the clone, that Cable is the clone, and he needs to destroy Cable. Strife turns out that he was actually the clone of Cable made and raised by Apocalypse. And that's why he kind of usurped Apocalypse, because, imagine having Apocalypse for a dad.
Yeah.
He's raising you on survival of the fittest. When you get old enough, you challenge the old man, and then you knock him on his ass. That's when you're in charge. And see, the thing is, nobody really knew the level of Cable's power. But the thing is, you get some demonstrations of Strife being a mutant, and him having telekinetic powers and telepathic powers. But up until this point, you really haven't seen much of Cable demonstrating powers. You'd see him using what might have been energy blasts or something, but for the most part, he just relies on military training and guns. And it seems to work for him. But now, the one thing, they do at this time kind of start writing him out of the X-Men or the X-Force team book, and he kind of mostly just kind of pops in and out for a while, especially after a little while with some of the because the solo book was kind of really starting to explore a lot more of his backstory, such as he had been brought from, you find out that he had been brought from the past to the future and raised there. You find out that he was actually raised there by two people that kind of look like Scott and Jean, but aren't. You find out that he's been fighting. He was basically brought to the future in order to be he was kind of, it was kind of like a chosen one type story with Cable, where he was chosen to be the guy that would defeat Apocalypse and blah, blah, blah. And I guess in a way he was, because his clone was the one that beat Apocalypse. And that when he was brought to the future.
Well, and that chosen one storyline all ties back to, that was Mr. Sinister thinking that much, right?
Yeah. Kind of, if I recall correctly. Now, although that was also kind of what they used in the Age of Apocalypse for the X-Man character, and Nate Gray. Now, keep in mind, Nate Gray is essentially almost exactly the same as Cable and almost exactly the same as Strife. And I say almost because their mothers aren't exactly the same people. And up until this point, we have no idea who his parents are. We just know that he was brought to the future, and he was very sick, and he was infected by a virus, and they thought he was going to die, so they cloned him in the future. And the clone is the one that got captured by Apocalypse's four horsemen, and Apocalypse took the baby and decided to raise it as his own in order to, because thinking that he had gotten baby Cable. And now, around this time, you're getting a lot more hints as to who his parents are, where he really came from. And it was starting to connect to a lot of older stories that had been done in X-Men and X-Factor to this point. So at this point, I gotta kind of rewind and go all the way back to oh God, I guess it would have been the early 80s, Uncanny X-Men 201. It was the birth of Scott Summers, Cyclops' son, Nathan Christopher Summers, that's born with him. Cyclops is the dad, but Madeline Pryor is the mother. Because at this point,
the clone of Jean Grey.
Yes, well, you don't know all the way back then that it's the clone of the Jean Grey, but you know that Scott had lost Jean. She died during the Phoenix Saga, and he kind of was listless, and then he left the X-Men, but he was coming back and forth. And while he was up in Alaska, he met this redhead that looked a lot like Jean, and he ended up falling in love, getting married, and now they're having a kid. And baby Nathan was born, and Cyclops kind of ended up disappearing because he found out that that Jean was alive again. And when he ran off to go find out that Jean was alive, that was around the time that Maddie had, he kind of abandoned her out in San Francisco. She calls the X-Men. The X-Men come in and save her, but the Marauders, or I believe it was the Marauders, were never really shown at the time who had kidnapped the baby. We just knew that the baby had been kidnapped. And shortly after, Maddie was one of the 9 X-Men, even though she was, powerless and essentially human, that died in Dallas fighting the adversary. So Maddie's now, and then they end up all out in the outback. Maddie thinks Scott's dead. Scott thinks Madeline's dead because he saw her die on TV in Dallas. She has no idea where Scott is. There's this team of, villains, well, ostensibly villains that kind of look like the original X-Men that are going around rounding up mutants that are calling themselves X-Factor. This is back when X-Factor was first launching. So Maddie ends up dead. And then, with the rest of the X-Men living in the outback, the X-Men X-Factor believes the X-Men are dead, so they kind of go back to being superheroes. And around this time, Scott and Jean end up back together. They're back together on X-Factor. Scott had left his wife as well as his baby, but Scott and Jean had somehow recovered baby Nathan. And, Inferno was kind of the culmination of the Scott and Maddie and Jean kind of love triangle. And it was kind of almost a battle for ownership or parentage of baby Nathan. And, kind of sort of almost a divorce story, except for where the birth mother turns into a demon and and her, because her husband left her for her twin sister, who also wants to be the baby or to be the baby's mother. So yeah, it got kind of weird. But so, at this point, baby, after Inferno's over, baby Nathan ends up with Scott and Jean, and they're basically playing parent to him. And, nothing really special going on. And around, I think it was right after or right before Extinction Agenda, there was a story with Apocalypse trying to get baby Nathan. claiming that he was the future. He was some super powerful, blah, blah, blah. He was going to grow into a great mutant, and, whoever controlled baby Nathan controlled the future. Oddly similar to what we later got in the Cable story about, Cable. And Apocalypse ends up infecting baby Nathan with a techno-organic virus. And around this time, this other kind of time traveler shows up from the future that looks weirdly like Jean, and also a little bit like Rachel Summers, which is, Scott and Jean's daughter from the Days of Future Past future. But she looks a lot like Rachel, except for with really long hair and kind of very tattered clothes, but wearing the old school, blue and yellow X-Men uniform, the same one that was like kind of their generic training uniforms.
Right.
And she's wearing that, but it's got all kinds of rags and stuff ripped around, and like this, kind of like a hooded cloak over it, and a lot of guns. And she's going by the name of Mother Ascani. And she basically convinces Scott and Jean to give her baby Nathan to take to the future, because they can heal him in the future. But this techno-organic virus, they cannot heal in the present. So they, with kind of a heavy heart in the middle of the battle, they hand the baby over to the Mother Ascani, and off she steps into this portal into the future, and that's the end of baby Nathan that we see. So at this point, we've gotten a lot of clues. Hey, by the way, this character that we've seen for the last couple of years in New Mutants actually is the same baby from all the way back in X-Men 201 and then X Factor that all of Inferno was about. Cable is actually the daughter. Cable is actually the son of Cyclops and technically Madeline Pryor, but he's kind of sort of sees Jean as more of his mom. So Cable at this point, we finally started getting a lot of clues. Cable is really the son of Scott and Madeline, and the kind of adopted son of Jean. And the Red and Slim parents that had been, raising him in the future were actually Scott and Jean, their psyches kind of brought to the future, Days of Future Past style, but put into the bodies of two people that kind of looked like them from the future. Yeah, it was just kind of goofy comic book stuff.
Right.
And so they kind of actually ended up raising their own kid years after they met him as an adult in the future, so that he could become the warrior they met in the past. It gets really, really goofy.
And time travel headache, like you talked about.
Yes, time travel headaches. So, and Cable kind of starts going through different metamorphoses at this time. He's still back and forth with X-Force. He's not really in control. He feels like he's trained Cannonball enough to be the leader that they need him to be. And Cannonball's kind of the field leader at this point of X-Force. And then Boom Boom, when Cannonball temporarily becomes an X-Man. Boom Boom's going by Meltdown at this point, but she ends up kind of taking over the team. And the Boom Boom we have in current comics is nothing like the one we got during the X-Force years. I hate this version of Boom Boom.
You hate the current one, not the past one.
Yeah, I hate the current one.
Yeah.
Where she's just like a ditzy drunk.
Yeah.
Ditzy drunk redneck. Yeah, that's no. But so, Cable's kind of starting to go through a couple of different phases. He kind of becomes you find out why his power is so weak, and why he really doesn't rely on it. It's because growing up and having the techno-organic virus infecting him, he ends up having to learn how to use his mutant powers, because you find out he is both telepathic and telekinetic, at an incredibly high level. But the reason why he doesn't use them is because he basically expends all of his mutant energy, like all of his mutant power, holding the techno-organic virus off from basically overtaking his body. You find out the techno-organic virus is basically a sentient alien robot cancer. It has a connection to the warlock species, which is kind of an offshoot of the phalanx, which and it's the whole thing is all really weird, and it has something to do with the Celestials, because Apocalypse's armor is celestial armor, and Apocalypse's ship is a celestial ship. And then, but the interesting thing is, at some point Cable comes back and he has what he's calling ship. That ship was the same thing that was also Apocalypse's ship years previous, that became X-Factor's base of operations in the late 80s as like a giant almost skyscraper in New York. And then ended up, he brought it back from the future, but only part of it. And ship was now going by, he was now calling it Graymalkin, which is, obviously a reference to the Graymalkin Lane, which is where Xavier's school was. And he was calling the ship actually, its AI had kind of evolved a lot, and he was calling it Professor. And the ship could time slide. And it can also teleport him. So he starts bouncing around throughout the timeline a lot. You find him using a weapon for a long period of time that he was calling his scimitar. It was basically this really long spear, and it allowed him to actually focus his psychic power, and the little bit of telekinetic power, like the telepathic and telekinetic power that he wasn't using for his to hold off the techno-organic virus. It would allow him to essentially focus it and amplify it using this weapon. So for a while, he kind of stopped using guns and kind of went to this big, long spear that kind of worked the same way. You remember seeing John Carter on Mars, where the aliens had those spears that would shoot lasers?
Yeah.
Or in Black Panther, they had the spears that shot lasers.
Yep. Same
friggin' thing here. So, and then for a while though, he found a way, and basically through a lot of time sliding, jumping through, and learning from different, like shaman and stuff, he kind of became he learned how to meditate. And for a while, he actually purged his body of the techno-organic virus. Like, literally, he sat there. I think it was the final issue of the Solo Cable book. This was shortly after 9/11, whenever they did the Enough Said month, which was, all the silent issues. Mm-hmm. And it was basically just him meditating for an entire issue. And then on like one of the last couple of pages, he basically vomits up the techno-organic virus, and he's purged it out of his body. Which so for the first time, you now have a Cable that is
unrestricted.
Unrestricted, yeah. And then they promptly did basically nothing with it.
Yeah.
Now, there was one other major thing with Cable especially when it came to like, his Chosen One prophecy, because there was always talk of what they called the 12. This is going back to the 80s. They were talk of the 12 mutants. And it was kind of this kind of very biblical, 12 apostles kind of thing. And nobody ever really knew who they were. And over the years, you'd get a glimpse that, this one is a member of the 12. And you don't know what the purpose of the 12 is. You don't know. And I don't even think the writers, whenever they started it, had a clue where the hell they were going to go with it.
Right.
Because that was the thing with a lot of the stuff. They'd just throw something out there. And if it was interesting, they'd explore it later. And if it wasn't, if people started asking them like, hey, so what's this whole thing about the 12? Then they'd be like, oh, cool. I can actually do something with this. People are interested.
You got me thinking Quiet Council now.
Yeah. That was the other thing. That was one of the Dawn of X things that kind of, I'm like, it's a 12, but Apocalypse is on it.
Yeah.
And see, then you find out that the prophecy of the 12 was part of the Uncanny kind of religion. And the Uncanny are kind of a tribe, as they're a religion practiced by in the future, like the far, far, far future, the 31st century, where Cable grows up, that are and there's a section of them called the Clan Chosen. And basically it was more of that kind of Chosen One, a lot of the same stuff that you have in a lot of YA stuff where, there's a Chosen One and he ends up with a bunch of friends and they become like almost a superhero team, but they're all young and nobody really believes them ever, but they're always saving the day kind of thing. Some Harry Potter shit. And, that was kind of what the Clan Chosen was. And they all eventually grew up. So, one of the things that they talked about was, and you find out that the 12 were the ones destined to, you believe, stop Apocalypse and stop the rise of Apocalypse. And that's the reason why Cable came back to the present in the first place, to stop the rise of Apocalypse in our time so that it never becomes his time, where it's kind of a very dystopian future. It's not, it's not like everything's hellfire and brimstone, but it almost takes it back to a primitive near Stone Age, because it wipes out so much of the population that I guess nature kind of takes back over. So you've kind of ended up, a lot of like the shots of the future are like little settlements and camps, but with a lot of really super high tech stuff. And then there'd be the occasional city, but it's not even really that big. And it was mostly kind of more like survivalist. That's what it seemed like the 31st century was. But basically they wanted to stop the billions of dead that happened, because you never really see that era. That are caused by Apocalypse rising in our time, because Apocalypse is essentially immortal. He might go and kind of hibernate for a century or so, but he's essentially immortal. His celestial tech essentially keeps him alive. And you find out that the 12 was actually a prophecy that Apocalypse himself started, because he needed 12 mutants in order to essentially transfer his spirit and powers, kind of the same way they did in the Apocalypse movie, into the body of, actually it was going to be baby Nathan. And the reason why Apocalypse didn't put himself into Strife when he had collected Strife is because he viewed Strife as unclean and impure because he was a clone. And that's kind of one of the reasons why he even raised him. So now, in the process, they kind of, after Age of Apocalypse, they brought X-Man, like Nate Gray, over to the 616. They had brought like 4 characters over. It was Nate Gray, Holocaust, the Sugar Man, and the Dark Beast. They all came over from the Age of Apocalypse reality. And since Nate Gray was actually the son of Jean and Scott and not Maddie and Scott, so he wasn't the child of a clone, and he had never been infected by the techno-organic virus. Apocalypse decided to replace him, replace Cable with X-Man as the person that he was going to, put his kind of spirit and body, all of his abilities into. And at the last moment, Scott jumped ahead, like jumped in front of him and ended up absorbing Apocalypse. So then they had the whole hunt for Cyclops thing, Jean and Cable, and then they separated. Eventually they ended up separating. This was the one time that around this time, believing that Cyclops is dead, Cable actually really started to honor his dad. They never really had a very close relationship. They would try to hang out from time to time, but see, Scott and Cable's relationship wasn't really that much different than Scott with his own dad, Corsair. Mm-hmm. They didn't grow up together. He wasn't, so he never grew up with having Corsair as a father, but then Cable grew up without having Cyclops as a dad. So Cyclops kind of feels almost useless at this point because he was abandoned as a kid and then he ends up as an absentee father.
Right. Yeah.
So you almost, especially with, but Cable decides to honor him, and he actually joins the X-Men. This was around the time that Claremont came back for his first return on X-Men, around 1999, 2000, about a year before Morrison came on. And Cable, joins the X-Men, but he doesn't want to lead. He feels that he's not in a place to lead, having lost his father and feeling very much responsible because he's the one that actually he was the one that actually collected all 12. He figured out who the 12 were, collected them all in the same place, and then and thinking that he was building a machine using their powers to stop Apocalypse, he built a machine that killed his dad.
Yeah, he did the groundwork for Apocalypse and it backfired.
Exactly. So you find out that the whole 12 mythology was kind of a long con done by Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now there was a lot for a while there. Cable kind of disappeared. He went by Soldier X for a period of time. It was not really the best period of time. And around this time, shortly after that is when they did the Deadpool and Cable, the Cable and Deadpool series that Fabian Nicieza, and I think it started as Mark Brooks and then it became Patrick Zurcher back before Patrick Zurcher started just using photo reference and turned into a douchebag.
Yeah.
And, they did the Cable and Deadpool series where they, it was kind of like an odd couple thing. But you also started really exploring Cable's, leader of men side, and him, he had got his dad back. He had got, he thought that he finished off Apocalypse. So he basically, and I think his future, he came back and found out that his future was basically gone. Like he had basically went back to the future, found out his future was gone, and felt like, okay, well, now what do I do to build something? I spent all these years trying to stop something. Now I need to build something. And for a while, you weren't sure what he was doing. And he kind of did the first iteration of what eventually became, you had always had mutants. They had kind of always been, there was always somebody kind of trying to create a little bit of almost an Israel for mutants. Magneto tried to do it with Asteroid M, but then he decided to become a warlord, and Asteroid M crashed into the ocean. There was, they used, for a while, the Savage Land. The Outback was kind of a little bit of the Morlock tunnels. They were all kind of refuges. And I know in recent years, currently we have Krakoa. Mm-hmm. Before that, a few years ago, we had Utopia, which was a bunch of pillars built by the Atlanteans and an island on top. And now that island was a mishmash of a number of previous things. Asteroid M, a little bit of what had crashed to Earth way back in the 90s X-Force, that was Ship, the remainder of Ship, like Grey Malkin, and that had been Cable's like time traveling ship with an AI, and a place that Cable had built out of these two and some other things previously called Providence. And Providence was Cable's attempt at kind of a mutant homeland, but it wasn't a mutant homeland. It was kind of a, that the way that like the Future Foundation tried doing that, like kind of place for the future where scientists and musicians and mutants and all kinds of different culture could come together and try to
work towards a better future.
Path.
Yeah,
build a path to the future. He had done that with Providence. Shield really, really did not like that, because he was basically building a superpower nation out in the Pacific, kind of near Hawaii. They were not too pleased with this, to the point where Nick Fury sent the friggin' Silver Surfer to stop Cable. And this was at a time where Cable had already, somehow he had ended up back with his techno-organic, virus. He was infected with the techno-organic virus again. Because, look, he's got that giant cool metal arm when he's got the techno-organic virus. When he doesn't, he's just some dude. He's a big jack dude with a bunch of guns, but he doesn't look nearly as cool. He doesn't have the flashy eye. He doesn't have the big metal arm. He doesn't look as cool. So they keep bringing back the techno-organic virus and reinfecting it. But at the same time, he had found a way to essentially supercharge his own powers. And you find out Providence is being held up by him. Even when he's not even there, it's being held up and held together by his powers. And even then, he still had the power to go toe-to-toe with the Silver Surfer. So if that gives you an idea of exactly how powerful, Cable can be. Now, one of the things that they haven't really covered in how you see in the MCU, they're talking about, who's going to be the new Captain America? And I've always argued against the Falcon being Captain America, because they established long ago that Sam doesn't have the hand-eye coordination or the strength to do it. So having him do it in the movies, or the same way that they had him do it in the comics, it was just bad comics. It was bad, bad editorial. Mm-hmm. Because around this time, they actually kind of showed that there's actually only really, other than Steve, about 3 people that can really wield the shield. One is Bucky, because he's got the arm. One is Hawkeye, because he actually does have the hand-eye coordination. And the third is actually Cable. Because you find out that actually in the future, Cable, one of the things that he carries into battle, like in the 31st century, is Captain America's shield. You find out he is the future, essentially Cable is also Captain America. There is no America at this point. Yes, he's got the shield and he kind of stands up for the same ideals.
That's awesome.
That was an interesting piece of trivia, because they really started exploring a lot of the trivia behind Cable and like a lot of his connections. Because they really started mining the past around this period, because I don't know why, but at the end of the whole thing, obviously the whole mutant utopia, or future direction of the world, utopian society that he was trying to build, gets destroyed. He goes down with the ship. You think he's dead. Of course he's not, because he's never dead. He's a time traveler. Come on, guys. Yeah. And they kind of went back to a little bit more, I guess, normal Cable, like normal kind of just basic superheroics around this time. And, but, oh, wait, no. I'm sorry. No, they didn't. They ended it because this was when Hope was born. Baby Hope. And somehow Cable knew who Hope was, but so did Bishop. And this is the only time whenever Bishop and Cable actually have anything to do with each other. This was when Cable believed that Hope needed to stay alive to bring back the mutant race. And Bishop believed she needed to be dead because she's the cause of the future that he came from. That was when he. What's that?
This is the kickoff of. This would have been Cable #1, right? They restart, yeah.
Yeah, this would have been Cable Volume 2, #1. And it essentially, that whole series became a cross-time race with Cable and Hope trying to stay ahead of a psychopath, like a bloodthirsty Bishop. Because this is like Bishop went like full on heel at this point.
Right.
There was no like, hey man, I don't want to do this, but I have to. This was like, no, he was gleefully trying to murder them.
The baby must die, yeah.
Yes. And this was kind of the first time you had already seen Soldier Cable, you had seen General Cable, you had seen Son Cable, trying to be a son to his younger than him father and mother. You saw kind of Peacenik build the future, path forward Gandhi Cable. And this was the first time you saw like Cable as a dad. Because even when he was running the New Mutants, he was never really a father figure. He'd call Sam son, like Cannonball. He'd call him son. But that was more of like hey son, stop it. Like, the same way a cop or a drill sergeant would do. That he's that guy. But this is the first time you actually get to see him as a parent. And
I always remember that cover with him sitting there, the eye, standing there, and he's got the baby strapped to his chest in the middle of the middle of the pouches. That cover is one of my favorites. It's one of those unforgettable ones.
Yeah. And you know what? I surprisingly enjoyed that series, even though I really hated how much of a villain they turned Bishop into. Because I don't think that they needed to make him like full on like
rabid.
Yeah. I mean, I understood his motivation. They could have kept his motivation a little more reasonable, but I guess the fact that, you know, Cable just kept dodging him or, you know, trying to strand him in places. Like, I think he ended up stranding him in like the 65th century or something like that with no time machine to get back. But I guess he somehow found one. I don't remember, because that ends up into the whole Uncanny X-Force around around Marvel now that I hate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am not. But recently, like I guess in the last probably 5 years, they hadn't really done much with Cable. They had, you know, he'd show up from time to time. They did they purged him of the techno-organic virus again, but this time, instead of actually maintaining all of his, you know, being the same looking guy, except for without a metal arm, and it just being tissue, like muscle and tissue and everything. This time they gave him like that whole arm and shoulder were all atrophied. Like he had this little skinny arm. So he had to use like Forge made him like basically an exoskeleton arm that he wore over that side.
Right. That way it still looked awesome.
Yeah, way it looked okay, but it kind of ended up looking like some weird manga shit. Or like almost like that, like if you took one of the arms off of the autoloader from Aliens.
Yeah.
That Ripley was running around
in. The yellow thing?
Yeah, if you ripped one of the arms off that and like managed to wire it into his into his body or something so that he could use it. And then like just strapped it on and then like here's your arm. So it didn't look nearly as cool. It looked like really oversized and large and, you know, like a bad manga. But they weren't really doing anything with him. And then he kind of got he got the techno-organic virus back again, because I guess they ran out of stuff to do with him on that one. And then you get into Extinction, which was, you know, you had X-Men Blue, X-Men Gold, and I think even X-Men Red running at this time, and none of them were very good. You were still dealing with that whole, you know, original 5 X-Men stuck in the future, unable to get back to the past.
This is Extermination, right?
Yeah, this is Extermination. And, you know, Cable shows up and he's like, look, we got to get them back to the past.
And Beast had brought them forward because he felt like the X-Men had lost their way. That's why they were there. So Beast had went and started screwing with the timeline. Was the big problem. And
it was mostly to teach Scott a lesson. Why he didn't just bring young Cyclops forward only instead of the whole team, I don't understand. But hey, you know, whatever. Doesn't need to. It's comic books and whatever.
Yeah.
But so, you know, Cable is trying to get them to go back to the past, and then he gets killed, and he gets like legitimately killed. Like you see him, like giant spike or something right through the chest, very, very, very much dead. And you see a shadowy figure that killed him. And the next issue, you find out it is Cable. Cable killed himself, except for this time, he's like 22, 23. Now, keep in mind, our Cable was, he came back when he first showed up in New Mutants 87. He is grizzled as shit. He has no soft spots for this team. He's not taking it easy on them. He wants to turn them into a paramilitary force that the X-Men would be afraid of to fight.
He was a seasoned, hardened soldier that's all he knew.
Yeah. And over time, he got very softened. He had all of his different incarnations. He got away from his mission at times. He'd kind of gallivant through time and space sometimes. He was not tasked on mission. And now he gets killed, and like some 22, 25-year-old version of him
and tells him as much too. He tells him, "You got soft, old man."
Yeah. He just straight up murks him, and he's like, "No, you got soft, old man. I'm here to do your job the way because you apparently can't get it done." And he goes and does it in the quickest, ugliest way. Like, it didn't need to be pretty. It didn't need to be nice. It just needed to work. He tracks down Mimic, cuts his wings off, tracks down the future, or the teenage Angel in the present, cuts off the weird cosmic wings that he has, sews the real wings back onto him, like the ones that he took off of Mimic. Mm-hmm. Mind wipes most of the team, changes. He has no mercy in this. He just is on task the whole time, and
mission first, just go.
Yeah, yes, it is just mission first. It is, does this next course of action further my mission? No, then I'm not taking it. Does it? Yes, then I'm taking it. And that's the only thing he cares about. He's not interested in being friends. He's not interested in finding family. He just needs to do the mission. And that actually was all right. I kind of didn't mind it.
Yeah. It was when I first saw it, my jaw dropped, of course, because now Cable's down. But then when you find out it's him from the past, or I guess him from the future, the younger brain, there goes another time headache. Him from the future coming back to murder an older version of himself, you're like, holy man, this just opened up a whole new can of worms. And like you said, he was completely focused at this point. This is not the guy we're seeing right now. That, I guess we'll get to that in a minute. But it's not the guy we're seeing right now in Cable #1 and in Dawn of X.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Why do we keep calling this Extinction? It was Extermination.
Extermination. Yeah, you're right.
Extinction was a different
crossover.
And then there was Extinction Agenda, which was a different crossover. There's only so many X words that are in the English language. And when it comes to X-overs, they will find a way to use one. And if they got to use it twice, they will. They'll just add an extra word onto it.
Oh, now you just start using 10. It's the Roman numeral now. So
yeah. Since we're now doing 10. The version that we get now is so much different. I don't understand this version of Cable, this kid Cable, because it seems like even the X-Force series after Extermination was very similar, but he was a little toned down, but it was mostly set in the future. He was back in the future with a bunch of X-Force from the present. So, he didn't need to be on task because he wasn't time traveling. Basically, it was like they followed him back to his house after work. So he doesn't know what the future is going to be if he doesn't succeed in his present, but he does know that his present is going to exist if he doesn't succeed in the past.
Right.
So, he's a lot more on point with that. He doesn't really have a mission. He doesn't have an exact set of goals, an exact direction that he knows he needs to do and knows he needs to take in the present, like his present, than he does in our present.
Yeah.
So, but then you get around to Dawn of X.
And first shows up in X-Men 1, and he's yelling at Jean Grey, asking him if he can trade his gun with Raza, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, what the heck? Where'd this guy come from?
Yeah, he went from being Kid Cable to being Teen Cable to being Tween Cable.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like this is the Cable that would be on, like, a Disney XD show.
Yeah.
Or like a Disney Channel, like, with, like, I don't know.
If they were doing the X-Men animated, if they were doing the X-Men animated Dawn of X on the Disney Plus app, this would be your Cable.
Yeah, like, I feel like if this was a live action, Ariana Grande was going to show up. Or some other former Mouseketeer.
Well, and I think we figured this is Zach from Saved by the Bell.
Yeah, and I realized, yeah, he is. He turned into, and then you get the current series, and he literally is just Zach from Saved by the Bell.
Yeah,
he's Zach Morris now, on wacky adventures, and making poor choices, and mugging from the camera.
Don't let the adults find out.
Yeah.
All these things that you're like, this isn't the same guy that was introduced.
Yeah.
That came back and killed the guy that we all liked in Old Man Cable, whether, he'd gotten soft or not. This isn't the guy that took him out. If you'd have left him this mission focus, and he's got a family now, and it's different, and it's okay to explore that. But I don't think you could shift from where he was to where he's at now as quick as you did without people kind of getting whiplash.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I want the Kid Cable from Extermination to come back and kill the Kid Cable from Dawn of X.
Even over in Fallen Angels, he was written better.
Yeah, he was. He at least had a mission there. And now, I still didn't understand, like, the whole, like, I understood the him not feeling comfortable thing there. Yeah. But, like, there was a lot of stuff in Fallen Angels that didn't get explored. I think because the Brian was leaving the book
right
quickly, or a lot faster than he expected. They had set up a lot of stuff for Cable in that, with him kind of having whatever deal he made with that thing,
Apoth.
Yeah, and they never explored any of that. And that still needs explored.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just this Kid Cable is terrible. I don't even recognize this. This is no longer Cable. This is no longer Extermination and X-Force Cable, like Kid Cable. This is just Zach Morris with a cybernetic arm.
Can they fix him going forward in this series? Yeah, keep in mind Jerry Dugan's writing it.
As long as Jerry Dugan is writing it, no.
Yeah, because it's always going to have to be the joke.
Yeah,
there's always going to have to be a punchline.
Yeah,
pending, and that's not going to be funny.
Yeah, and it's never going to be funny. I mean, he's asking Wolverine for a timeout during a fight. He's no, everything about he's the version of Cable that I would have hated if he was introduced now. Yeah. Nobody likes this Cable.
And do you know if Phil Noto's staying on the art?
I honestly don't know. I've never seen him. This is the first time I think I've ever seen him do interiors.
Yeah.
So I haven't the slightest clue. He might stick around for 4 or 6 issues and then leave. I don't know.
I'm good if he goes back to doing covers.
Yeah, I kind of am too. and you know what? And it really kind of confused me a lot with bringing de-aging Cable back to a teen for the current run, because they just brought back Nate Gray, who was already the teenage, Cable.
Yeah, and that the series that they did right before.
Yeah, and then they screwed it up with doing Age of X-Men.
Yeah.
But they still could have done something with Nate Gray. And if they really needed a younger, more teenage demographic Cable, Nate Gray was the one to do it with. And they didn't. I never understood that.
Right. Well, Doc, I mean, you've laid it down. Absolutely amazed by your vast knowledge, your X-Men knowledge, man. So thanks for sitting down and talking with me. If you had to say your best Cable moment of everything, what would you say is your most memorable moment? You know what? There's kind of two, but I think the most perfect Cable moment was him just going toe to toe while simultaneously leveling. He's holding up Providence and fighting the Silver Surfer at the same time. Yeah,
I mean, Silver Surfer is he's a guy that can go toe to toe with Thor and beat Thor's ass.
Right.
And Cable beats him while holding a city up.
That's hard to beat.
Yeah, it kind of is. But I think the other one would be, I really enjoyed his brief time as a member of the X-Men during Claremont's return.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever have a chance to find the X-Men Revolution omnibus, pick that up. It's got the period of time with Cable as a member of the X-Men, on Jean's team. Jean was, I think, the leader of that team, and Rogue was the leader of the other team at the time. But yeah, if you have a chance, check that out. And
I'm gonna have to check out Amazon and everything, because it looks like we're going to have some time for some reading here shortly.
Yeah, I think everybody's going to have some time. And you know what? I'd go with the that Messiah War era with X-Force and Cable, the where they're running around through the future trying to escape Strife and Bishop. I would, while Hope's a little older at this point,
yeah,
I would check that out.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, brother, thanks for hanging out with me, man. This was great.
Anytime, man. Sorry for going on for so damn long.
Absolutely not, man. This is great. I loved it. So.
All right.
All right, brother. Talk to you later.
Take care.
Peace. If you haven't yet, make sure you leave a like, and you can find Doc on Twitter at ScienceJesus. He is our official X-Men historian for the Comic Aficionados, and he loves to talk X-Men. So, guys, make sure you follow him there. Appreciate you watching the video, and thanks again to Doc for coming on and hanging out with me. That's all I got. Real Comic Stacks. Out.